Discover the incredible truth behind a little girl's Christmas Eve question that transformed Eve. Eve Johnson held her breath. This was it. The music from the neighboring houses twinkled like the lights strung on her modest Christmas tree, casting a warm glow over their small living room. It was just the two of them, a single mother and her spirited daughter, Lucy, nestled in their cozy corner of the world. But this year, as the holidays approached, something felt more fragile than ever. The pressure of bills weighed heavy like a shroud. "Mom, what is the greatest gift of all?" Lucy's innocent question spilled into the chilled air, sending shivers down Eve's spine. Eve paused, overwhelmed. A glance at her daughter, bright-eyed and bubbly, painted a stark contrast against the creeping shadows of her financial worries. Memories of her own childhood flashed through her mind. The sacrifices her parents made for her, the dreams she folded away like tattered pages in a book. Could she even dream of a life beyond the rhythm of her waitressing job? Yet it always seemed just out of reach, that shimmering glow of stability. There was the looming rent increase notice that had arrived just days before. An eviction notice hovering like a storm cloud, waiting to break. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. With each passing day, the spiral tightened. Would it really come to packing up their lives, uprooting Lucy from the only home she'd ever known? The thought sunk in deeper than a hook in fresh water. And there was her job, bustling and grueling under fluorescent lights, where she served tables filled with families celebrating the season. She could almost convince herself that laughter was contagious, that their joy could somehow fill her empty spaces. But there was little solace in denying her own struggles, the growing unease gnawing at her. As she felt the familiar pull of desperation, a revolution sparked inside her when she stumbled upon her late grandmother's abandoned art studio in the attic. Dust-coated canvases and forgotten paint tubes glimmered with potential. A different kind of life beckoned her. The idea suddenly shook her from the numbness of her existence. Could that sort of creativity be a gateway to something better? Yet, as she stood at the entrance of possibility, doubts lurked, gnashing their teeth at her hesitation. Her heart raced at the thought of failure, of chasing dreams through a crumpled-up mess of a life. With Lucy's innocent hope buzzing around her like a mischievous elf, the decision loomed, trapping her between safety and vulnerability. Eve's musings shifted back to Lucy's question haunting the festive air around them. The greatest gift. What did that mean? It settled deeply like an anchor holding her amidst the storm, pressing her to face the reason she considered this leap at all. While Christmas lights twinkled in the neighborhood, a silent urgency coursed through her veins. The time was ticking, and as the clock approached midnight, she felt the defining weight of what it might mean to allow herself to truly live. Would she answer her daughter's innocent inquiry with courage or let fear hold her hostage? With a trembling heart, she stood paralyzed before the unfinished canvas, fully aware that the moment she stepped forward would reshape the very fabric of their lives. Eve took a deep breath, grounding herself in the dimly lit attic. Dust particles danced around her, illuminated by the flickering of the fluorescent bulb hanging above. Memories flooded her mind as she surveyed the remnants of her grandmother's vibrant world, colors long faded, waiting to be revived. Here lay a treasure trove of dreams, yet Eve felt like an intruder. Did she deserve to reclaim this space, to step into the story of someone else? With hesitation, she reached for a paintbrush lying motionless among the debris. The brushes felt foreign in her hand, almost like relics of a past life she had long opted to set aside. But in that moment, she sensed a flicker of her own creativity stirring from its slumber. What if all those years of anguish could channel into something beautiful? Daring to voice her thoughts, she whispered, "What is the greatest gift?" The echo of Lucy's question bounced around the attic, compelling Eve to confront her own insecurities. Was it the comfort of a stable paycheck or the fulfillment of following her passion? The dichotomy seemed insurmountable, and the anxieties that had built up like a wall began to close in. What would happen if she failed? Could she justify pursuing art, knowing Lucy's future depended on her? Yet, as her fingers brushed the canvas, she could almost feel a heartbeat pulsing beneath the surface, a yearning for liberation. Clenching the brush, she wrestled with her fear. She envisioned turning those calloused hands that served tables into an instrument of expression, one that could breathe life into her long-lost aspirations. The weight of bills was still heavy on her shoulders, but it took on a different texture. It was a catalyst. With resolve shifting within her, Evie picked up one of the old palettes, colors waiting to burst forth. She dipped her brush and hesitated. How do you begin when your life feels so chaotic? Could she transform chaos into artistry? The question lingered as she pressed the bristles to the canvas, splashes of color colliding like firecrackers, igniting long-buried dreams. Each stroke released a sea of emotions trapped within her: fear, hope, and everything in between. She knew she couldn't abandon her responsibilities as a mother. Lucy needed her. But in creating this art, could she also nurture her spirit? As she painted, she envisioned a new narrative. What if her work could inspire not only herself but others as well? A thought shimmered: perhaps the greatest gift was not the end product, but the journey itself. Would it spark a change in her life, the kind of change Lucy would one day understand? As the colors began to swirl into a recognizable form, a wave of determination washed over her, grounding her in this pivotal moment. Life outside remained uncertain, but as she stood before the canvas, engulfed in the hues of the present, she realized she was learning to redefine her identity. This was not just about survival, it was about realization who she could be. But even as hope stole across the room, doubt crept in, whispering that this was just a beautiful distraction. Could she maintain this momentum beyond the confines of her attic? Would her fledgling courage withstand the turbulence of reality, especially when the rent was due, and Lucy looked up at her with expectant eyes? The stakes were rising, and she felt the pressure mounting like an intricate design piecing itself together, yet still incomplete. As she gazed at the evolving painting, another question surfaced: was this an escape, or her destined path to fulfillment? The brush trembled in her grip, steeped in both fear and the intoxicating thrill of potential. The answer coursed through her veins, insistent and demanding, urging her to confront the world beyond the attic. The choice loomed before her, daring her to seize it or let it slip away into the ether of unfulfilled dreams. In that moment, Eve resolved to face whatever came next with her newfound insight. But as she drew in a breath, ready to paint another stroke, a noise echoed from downstairs, a knock on the door that sent her heart racing. What could it be? Uncertainty washed over her once again. Was it the final eviction notice, or perhaps a chance encounter that could change everything? The knock reverberated through the attic, a sudden jolt pulling Eve from her creative trance. Her heart raced, each beat amplifying her unease. She stood frozen, clutching the paintbrush like a lifeline, both excited and terrified of what could wait for her on the other side of the door. Questions swirled in her mind: what if it was the landlord, ready to deliver grim news about their rent? Or perhaps a friendly neighbor with an offer of support? After a moment's hesitation, curiosity pushed her legs into action. She clambered down the narrow attic stairs, paint-splattered hands nervously brushing against her clothes. Each step felt like a mini-journey, taking her away from this newly discovered sanctuary and back into the world that had so often felt heavy and unforgiving. As she reached the door, she took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. She grasped the knob with clammy fingers and pulled it open, revealing a figure on the porch, a woman in her mid-40s, with weathered hands and kind eyes. It was Mrs. Thompson, the kind-hearted woman from next door who often exchanged pleasantries as they passed in the hallway. Eve felt a wave of relief. This was no landlady demanding funds. In fact, it seemed the universe had conspired to present her with a moment of reprieve. "Eve, dear, I hope I'm not intruding," Mrs. Thompson said warmly, her expression tinged with concern. "I just wanted to check in on you and Lucy. There's a lot of noise in the building lately, and I thought you could use a little company." Eve invited her in, the chaotic energy of the attic still thrumming in her veins. "Thanks, Mrs. Thompson. I appreciate it," she managed to say, the weight of her unpainted canvas lingering in her mind. The two settled into her modest living room, the cozy yet chaotic atmosphere filled with playful remnants of Lucy's toys scattered on the floor. Their conversation started innocuously, but soon veered towards deeper waters. Mrs. Thompson spoke about her own struggles with pursuing her passions, like painting landscapes that had once captivated her, just as art once captivated Eve. As she recounted her journey, a flicker of recognition sparked within Eve. Here was someone who had stepped away from their dreams for the comfort of stability, yet still grappling with the ache of unfulfilled desires. Eve found herself drawn into Mrs. Thompson's story, relating it to her own. They talked about sacrifices, dreams deferred, and the weight of practicality. But in that conversation, amidst their shared confessions, something profound happened. Eve saw the reflection of her own fears and aspirations in Mrs. Thompson's eyes. For the first time, it became evident that she wasn't alone in her turmoil, they were kindred spirits navigating the same tumultuous sea. Yet it was Mrs. Thompson's parting words that struck Eve the hardest as she rose to leave. "Never let your dreams die without a fight, Eve. You have a gift inside you, don't forget to let it breathe. Sometimes, you have to claim what's yours." As the door shut behind her, Eve felt a shift within herself. With renewed energy, she returned to the attic and stood before the half-finished canvas. There was an urgency now, a call to pour out the fight she had just witnessed in herself and Mrs. Thompson. She picked up the brush, electrifying determination surging through her. She started painting with abandon, the strokes echoing her turbulent thoughts. But the canvas was no longer merely a backdrop for her pain, it had transformed into a vessel of hope, representing her daring pursuit of both her passion and future. As she lost herself in colors and forms, her artistic vision unfolded, revealing images that whispered to her promises of who she could finally become. But just as confidence began to root itself, a pang of doubt flickered. Was she really ready to claim her dream? What if the world rejected this new, vulnerable part of herself? As she stepped back to view her progress, the knock of self-doubt came creeping back. In the solace of the attic, with her paintbrush poised, she hesitated. Yet again, would she choose to embrace the risk of creative expression, or retreat to the safety of her previous existence? Instead of retreat, Eve leaned into the tension, feeling the weight of both fear and excitement. She knew she stood at a crossroads. The paint was her courage, the canvas her future, and now, she could feel a new resolve forming. The question remained a pressing uncertainty that had taken root within her: what would she unleash next? The quiet of the attic submerged Eve in a bubble of introspective thoughts, the chaotic realm of colors contrasting sharply with the stillness of her mind. She leafed through the doubts plaguing her. Was she enough? Did her talent merit attention? Gripping the brush as if it was a wand, she forced herself to focus. Maybe it was time to let go of the fear and start painting her truth, even if it felt naked and vulnerable. Each stroke felt like a declaration in the face of uncertainty. The canvas transformed beneath her hands, bold hues clashed and mingled, mirroring the tumult within her. This wasn't just paint anymore, it was her consuming desire for freedom, her silent scream for validation echoing in every swirl and line. She found herself painting scenes that spoke of childhood innocence, of the sunny afternoons spent discovering her art, and the magic that wrapped around her unconditionally through the lens of creativity. But the act of creation brought an unexpected visitor to the fragile space she'd built. Memories flooded back, images of Lucy giggling in sunlight, their shared art supplies sprawled across the floor, the sound of her daughter's laughter embedding itself in the core of Eve's being. In that moment, she realized that her art was not solely for herself, it was a message, a legacy to Lucy, a reminder that dreams could be fought for and that the act of creating should never be stifled by fear. With every brushstroke, she confronted her past choices, events that had made her retreat into practicality. What was the point if the cost was her joy? The fear of judgment, failure, of being labeled a dreamer, had captured her for too long. As she layered colors upon the canvas, with each swipe, she felt the chains of her old self beginning to crack, freed by newfound fervor. The door of doubt slammed shut behind her. She imagined standing before an audience, her heart racing, not with fear but exhilaration. "I am here," she would proclaim through the canvas, "and this is my heart." But then, thoughts threatened to slip out of control. What if she failed under scrutiny? What if the world was not ready for her truth? Wouldn't that just prove that Mrs. Thompson's words were mere whispers lost in the wind? Stepping back to analyze her work, she caught her breath, her heart thumping wildly. She recognized the pattern. The fight against her inner critic was as pivotal as the fight for her art. The canvas held the untapped promise of a future she wanted to create, yet the pulsating fear still wormed its way into her consciousness, making her second-guess if it was worth the risk. Her resolve flickered momentarily and the thought took form, a challenge nestled deep in her psyche. Perhaps it was time to test boundaries, to tell her truth in public spaces, to confront the world and herself. The idea thrived, fueled by vulnerability and the prospect of rejection. As night fell, a newfound energy coursed through her veins. Eve nourished the seed planted within her if she truly wanted to step into her power, stepping away from the haunting echoes of doubt. She leaned over her palette, mixing a vibrant color, a metaphor for the transformation she craved. But amid her resolve, a thought disrupted her momentum. What if her expectations threatened to drown her before she could fully leap? The swirl of excitement became intermingled with panic, provoking a new question: could she truly bear the weight of realizing this dream, especially if it meant risking her sense of self in the process? While wrapping herself in this mental turmoil, the door of her creative world felt ajar, the call of the outside world lurking ever closer. Eve could sense it, the moment of daring was near. Would she be able to step through the threshold, or would she retreat back to the shadows once again? As she stood lost in thought, the vibrant chaos of her unformed artistic identity clamored for clarity. It was time to confront not just her doubts but to face whatever awaited her, the outside world, and perhaps, the unsettling voice of her own aspirations. What awaited that precipice of revelation? The answer beckoned, leaving Eve teetering on the brink of an important decision. Would she dive into the unknown or turn to the comfort of the familiar? A thin thread of dawn light began to filter through the attic window, an invitation to confront what lay outside the cocoon of her creativity. Eve's determination, though newfound, was tempered by a gnawing sense of uncertainty. She had unveiled these vibrant strokes of truth to herself, but how could she share them with others? The idea of exposing her artistic soul felt perilously close to unearthing long-buried vulnerabilities. Opening her sketchbook, she began drafting a new concept. Her mind raced with images, colors splashing across the canvas like a memory bursting forth. How could she communicate the essence of her tumultuous journey? What was the core message she wanted to convey? She realized then that it was never just about the art. It was about connection, building bridges through vulnerability, inviting the world to see not just the surface but the intricate layers of her experience. As she sketched, a wave of nostalgia washed over her thoughts. Memories of Lucy flooded back, punctuated by the question her daughter had once asked during a Christmas Eve filled with anticipation. "Mom, if you could paint anything, what would it be?" That innocent query had stirred something deep within, a recognition of dreams long tucked away in the recesses of her mind. Lucy had asked for truth, a banquet of colors, and in that moment, Eve felt the weight of disappointment she'd harbored for failing to pursue her passions. Institutionalized as a practical woman, she'd let responsibilities shroud the artist who craved freedom. With renewed vigor, she grabbed her palette, excited yet apprehensive about what this surprise of energy could yield. Each color she mixed now pulsated with a promise. Would she dare to explore that boundless expanse of her imagination and lay bare the heart that beat beneath layers of doubt? The day unfolded like an open canvas. Eve's brushes moved with a sense of urgency, as though the pieces of herself she wished to reclaim spilled forth, eager to reclaim her narrative. Yet even as she immersed herself in her art, the lingering specter of self-doubt loomed over her, whispering warnings of rejection and criticism. Could she truly unveil herself? Layers of experience, raw emotions under the watchful gaze of strangers. It was this dilemma that propelled her to take an audacious step. She began drafting her plan for a public unveiling of her work. The idea electrified her, sending rivulets of adrenaline coursing through her veins. Yet immediately, fear lashed at her, reminding her of all the potential dangers. What if the feedback was harsh? What if her attempt to connect turned into a public humiliation? The urgency of excitement became intertwined with self-preservation, creating a mental tug-of-war. Navigating through this storm of emotions, Eve felt the introspective calm she had experienced in the attic dissipating. She needed clarity, a concrete action to stabilize the shifting ground beneath her. Standing before her canvas, she resolved to set a date, a commitment that would transform an idea into a reality. Even if it meant risking the vulnerability she so fearfully clutched. As her fingers danced over the canvas in preparation, a profound realization struck. This act of choosing to share her truth was in itself a victory, a leap toward reclaiming her artistry. The once terrifying prospect transformed into an exhilarating challenge that had the power to reshape her identity. But uncertainty still crept in, and her heart thudded with the awareness of the stakes. Just as she prepared to calm the tempest inside her, she hesitated. What if confronting this fear proved more revealing than simply the unveiling of art? Could this challenge unearth deeper truths buried beneath layers of comfort? The threads of her thoughts felt woven together with anticipation and dread. In that moment, she recognized that confronting her fears wouldn't just be about the art. It was about stepping into a new chapter of her life, one where she dared to take ownership of her legacy. With each brushstroke, Eve confronted more than just paint. She confronted her demons, her aspirations, and the vulnerabilities that shaped her. It was time to embrace the unknown. Would her revelation shatter her foundations or help her build anew? The horizon of possibility expanded before her, drawing her closer to that precipice once again. What awaited her at the edge of this transformation? The answer loomed, both thrilling and terrifying, as Eve felt herself poised for an important leap, one that would redefine her reality. Eve lingered in the charged atmosphere of her attic, each brushstroke imbued with newfound resolve. The morning sun spilled through the window, illuminating the chaos of colors emerging on her canvas, a whirlwind of emotions, aspirations, and fears brightly layered one over the other. She had been hesitant to acknowledge it, but this was more than just art, it was her resurrection. Yet as vivid as her palette had become, the root of her vulnerability tugged at her insides. What had she truly been afraid of? The thought echoed in the recesses of her mind like an unanswered question. Every fiber of her being knew that sharing her art would peel back layers of a well-constructed persona, but how could she articulate what lay beneath? While she no longer seemed as trapped as before, she still needed to navigate this emotional labyrinth. This drive to unveil her work, albeit noble, was fraught with internal conflict. With each stroke, the balance of hope and anxiety teeter-tottered dangerously. The echoes of her past mistakes and self-doubts combined to create a paralyzing noise. Eve pressed her palms against her thinly painted canvas as if hoping to absorb its essence, feeling every ounce of her uncertainty break away with the pressure. It was time to silence that noise. Eve devoted her afternoon to focusing on what her upcoming showcase could look like. The very thought sent tremors of excitement mixed with visceral fear rippling through her body. How could she convey a narrative of struggle and triumph with mere strokes of color? Could others truly resonate with the rawness of her truth? She envisioned a space warm and inviting, yet pulsating with energy that would serve as a backdrop to her evolution. As she rendered ideas, a subtle transformation unfolded within her. Planning the layout of the exhibition blistered her trepidation into clarity. Framing room for each piece evoked a sense of purpose, a precise alignment of her past struggles with her newfound voice. Perhaps it would not just be an exhibition of art but a testament to growth, a manifesto of courage encapsulated in paint. Yet with every plan drilled down, an underlying voice popped up, admonishing her. What if no one cared? What if all that courage went unseen, lost in indifference? It raged against her emerging sense of agency, clawing at the corners of her confidence. The incessant questioning created another layer of tension, a heavy cloak she felt she had to discard to step onto the stage of her life. In a bid for balance, Eve gathered notes and sketches, creating a sense of cohesion. Each piece became a narrative thread woven into a larger tapestry reflecting not only her journey but the stories of those around her. As her aim shifted toward authenticity, she caught herself wondering, could her vulnerability serve as a bridge to others, connecting them through shared experiences? The thought offered a glimmer of solace, a flickering ember in the gale-force winds of her apprehension. Emboldened, she began to write statements for each painting, clarifying her intent and illuminating her core message. The process fueled her. The more she articulated her thoughts, the more assured she felt the shackles of self-doubt slowly loosening their grip. But just as she began to believe in the merit of her art, the question hung over her: what would become of her if, after all this effort, no one understood her? In that moment, she recognized an epiphany glowing like a beacon of light through the fog of anxiety. This wasn't merely about validating herself through the eyes of others, it was about claiming ownership of her narrative. The fear of rejection became overshadowed by a fierce desire to embrace her artistry as an act of defiance against the unworthy whisper of doubt. Eve stood firm before her canvas, acutely aware of the shift within her. Every bead of color absorbed her strength, every stroke became a symbol of resilience, courage, and the inherent beauty that lay within vulnerability itself. She was redefining her reality, yes, but she was also crafting a path for others who might feel ensnared in their silences. And just before she was set to test the waters of her commitment, an email notification blinked into view. Her heart skipped. It was from a local art collective that had reached out weeks before, intrigued by her artistry. They wanted to discuss a partnership. The thrill fused with a disquieting tension. Was this a sign? Or would this push her further into the unknown she was just beginning to embrace? As uncertainty enveloped her, Eve knew that the threads of her journey were yet to intertwine with a grander tapestry of fate. The next few steps loomed dauntingly ahead. Would she dare to accept, or would she retreat once more into her safety cocoon? Eve sat frozen in front of her computer screen, the glow of the email reflecting her mixed emotions. The art collective was a step into uncharted territory, a terrain both exhilarating and intimidating. She could almost hear her heart beating frantically, urging her to contemplate the possibility of taking this leap. With a deep breath, she positioned her fingers over the keyboard, hovering for a moment before deciding to respond. This was more than merely accepting an offer, it was an assertion of her identity as an artist. As she began to type, her mind drifted to memories of her childhood, the days when art was an escape rather than a pursuit structured by performance and scrutiny. That innocent passion had been overshadowed by the cacophony of expectations built from anxiety, as if the very act of creating had morphed into worldly scrutiny instead of a pathway for self-discovery. Eve recalled a particular Christmas Eve, the year she had been enveloped in swirling glitter and the bliss of untainted imagination. It was then she had scribbled a question to Santa: what if I never grow up? That question had been a portal to realizing the magic of vulnerability, where her dreams could roam free without fear of judgment. Yet, in the hallway of adulthood, she had stumbled into a mirage of perfectionism. This negotiation loomed as if it were holding a mirror to that child, the innocent desire to simply create, and for a fleeting moment, Eve felt the thrill of being that girl once more. She hit send, grounding herself in the decision. Almost as quickly, doubt raced in. Had she just opened the door to chaos, erasing her cherished solitude? The collective came with expectations, collaborations, and exposure to critiques. What if they saw her art as mere amateurism, a child's play rather than poignant revelations? A feathery feeling of dread flickered in her stomach, forcing her to confront the shadows that often haunted her creative endeavors. The nagging question loomed large: what if by stepping out into the dim light of exposure, she lost the essence of herself? Yet intertwined with that fear was another burgeoning voice, a defiant flame flickering within her that whispered of growth, potential, and connection. Eve turned back to her canvas, her heart aligning with her brush. Each brushstroke transformed from a mere action into an act of rebellion against her fears. She painted furiously, layering blues and reds, swirling light and dark. With each stroke, she became less focused on the outcome and more on the tactile experience of the paint moving across the surface, a meditation against the noise of incessant critiques. The telephone rang, slicing through her concentration. It was Mira, her mentor from art school. Eve took a moment, catching her breath before answering, needing to share her news. But as they spoke, she began to notice Mira's voice turning serious, as if brimming with unasked questions. "Are you ready to dive in? It will challenge you, no doubt." Eve's voice faltered, caught between excitement and dread. "What if they don't understand my art? What if they do?" Mira shot back, her tone a mix of encouragement and confrontation. The question landed heavy in the air, urging Eve to acknowledge the gravity of her own narrative. Could she allow herself to be seen, to operate within the realm beyond her self-imposed restrictions? "I'll be vulnerable, and that terrifies me," Eve finally confessed. "Good," Mira replied with certainty. "Art is there to challenge vulnerabilities. Embrace it. Let them resonate with your truth." The conversation cast a flickering light into her internal storm. This wasn't merely about sharing her art, it was a chance to delve into her artistry's authenticity and open dialogues about honesty and triumph. Eve began to reconsider the layers she had painted with each application of color. She pushed against the walls of self-doubt creeping further behind her facade of confidence. As their conversation closed, Eve returned to her canvas with renewed purpose. In that moment of clarity, her mission crystallized. Vulnerability could become her most potent tool. It was not a weakness to be afraid, it was the very essence that made any authentic creation come alive. The looming art showcase could become a chance for connection, for shared stories, a dialogue that transcended her constructed realities. But just as she succumbed to hope, an unsettling thought crept in: what would happen if all her efforts crumbled, if the world saw raw emotions without the solace of understanding? The possibility chilled her, yet it made the urge to create buzz like a siren echoing from deep within. Eve's brush paused midair, suspended between flaring anticipation and trembling uncertainty. It was in that stillness that she knew she had to forge ahead. The moment to embrace her past and shape her future was no longer in the distant horizon, it flickered in the paint-splattered chaos of her studio. Yet, even as she stirred with renewed determination, a sense of apprehension still loomed. She was about to break free from the constraints of her artistic cocoon and step into the world, but the question nagged at her: would the world be ready to meet Eve, the unfiltered creator? As she grappled with this immense crossroads, another notification lit up her screen. A schedule for the collective's upcoming meetings, dates and names she barely recognized, and the realization struck her. Familiarity would be scarce, support thin. The path forward expanded, but so did the shadows of uncertainty. Would embracing the chaos render her art as a beacon of community through vulnerability, or would it fracture under the weight of public scrutiny? As she stared at the screen, Eve couldn't ignore one fundamental truth: the moment of truth awaited her, and whatever came next would redefine everything. Eve leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of the last few moments pulse through her like a drumbeat. The email invitation had ushered her into a realm that felt both thrilling and terminally frightening. Deep within, adrenaline coursed through her, rekindling the notion that this was merely the beginning. The looming schedule for the collective's meetings swirled in her mind like vivid colors on her palette, each date another brushstroke on the blank canvas of her future. The thought of venturing into those unknown spaces gripped her with both eagerness and hesitation. As the shadow of anxiety wrapped itself tightly around her heart, a determination burgeoned alongside it. What would it mean to step into her power as an artist? To embrace the parts of her she had long masked beneath layers of self-criticism and expectations. The very essence of artistry, she realized, arose from a place of vulnerability. She recalled Myra's words: her mentor had captured a truth that sparked a fire in her spirit. Taking a deep breath, Eve scrolled down the list. The names attached to the meetings were a mixture of established artists and fresh faces, strangers who had navigated their own journeys, some likely entangled in the same complex web of fear and ambition. Each time she paused over a name, she imagined the layers of experience hidden behind it. What stories did they hold? How had they navigated their own crossroads? Facing an inner dilemma, she could sense the creeping sensation of comparison clawing at her confidence. What if these artists unveiled their truths with such finesse, while Eve clumsily stumbled over her own, too afraid to be seen? But then she stopped, forcing herself to reconsider. Her narrative didn't need to mirror theirs, her authenticity was a unique tapestry woven from the threads of her battles and aspirations. Suddenly, inspiration struck, urging her fingers back to the canvas. She felt an insatiable urge to process this conflicting melange of excitement and anxiety onto the surface she so cherished. With a determined stroke, she dipped her brush into a vibrant orange, a color that invoked warmth and hope. Mixed with streaks of darker hues, it represented the amalgamation of light and shadow, reflecting her turbulent emotions. As each movement became instinctual, her thoughts began flowing naturally, merging with the rhythm of her arm. It was a rhythm that expressed not merely the art she aimed to create, but the person she sought to become. This canvas was no longer just a representation of her skill, it metamorphosed into a testament of her journey. Hours ticked by, yet Eve continued to paint, her brush dictating her emotions louder than her mind. The fear that once clouded her vision dissipated, making way for revelations about her hidden strengths. Perhaps it was possible to balance vulnerability and strength without being torn apart. The chaos she feared might become a wellspring of connectedness, allowing others to see snippets of their stories reflected in her work. With renewed determination, she began formulating a plan how to transform her raw feelings into art that could resonate with the world beyond her walls. The upcoming meetings became not stepping stones of dread, but crucial platforms for expression she longed to embrace. She noted each name on the schedule, planning to bring something personal, a piece of her truth. Yet doubt lingered, curling back like an old friend. Perfection hung over her like a storm cloud, threatening to overshadow her newfound momentum. What if, despite her best efforts, her vulnerabilities were misunderstood? Would her bold expressions be seen as pretentious instead of profound? The critical voice within began to stir, reminding her of all her perceived failures. Still, Eve resolved to face those fears head-on rather than cowering beneath their weight. The creative community she was stepping into wasn't merely about criticism, it was about exploration, connection, and transformation. These artists, too, bore their scars and sought to bridge the chasms they felt within themselves. Perhaps vulnerability was not something to fear but rather an invitation. Eve squared her shoulders, feeling a sense of clarity begin to unfurl within her. Clenching her paintbrush with newfound tenacity, she began to push her brush against the canvas again, preparing for each dip, each stroke, as if they were new chances, new beginnings. Yet as she painted into the twilight, a soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Startled, she stepped back from the canvas, her heart racing. Who was it now, and what did they want? The potential for distraction felt monumental. Perhaps it was a reminder that the real world beckoned, demanding her attention, just as she was finally embracing her artistic zenith. Would this interruption bring with it questions or revelations that could further challenge her resolve? Time seemed to stand still as she approached the door, anticipation and anxiety coiling tightly in her stomach. The moment was at hand, and Eve braced herself for whatever awaited her beyond the threshold. Eve hesitated for a moment, her hand resting on the doorknob as a mixture of anticipation and trepidation washed over her. The knock had come at a pivotal time, an instant where she felt both stimulated and vulnerable. With a deep breath, she turned the knob. The door swung open to reveal a small girl, no more than 6 or 7, with wide, curious eyes. She clutched a hastily wrapped package adorned with colorful paper, its edges frayed and tattered. The girl's presence struck Eve like a sudden gust of wind, bringing with it a whiff of childhood innocence that felt foreign amidst her cluttered studio. "Hi, Miss Eve." The girl chirped, her voice bright as the sunlight pouring in through the open window. "I made you something." Eve's heart fluttered, both disarmed and intrigued. "Oh, thank you. That's very sweet of you," she replied, keeping her voice light as she knelt to meet the girl at eye level. The girl beamed and thrust the tiny package forward, her excitement palpable. "Open it. I want to see your face when you see what's inside." As Eve carefully unwrapped the gift, the paper fell away to reveal a small, hand-painted rock, a simple creation adorned with a smiley face and vibrant colors, a stark contrast to the more complex palette lying on her canvas. It was raw, unabashedly innocent in its expression. "It's a rock for your art," the girl explained, bouncing on her toes. "So you can think about all the happy things when you paint. You should always have fun while you create." Tears pricked at the corners of Eve's eyes, the overwhelming tenderness of the moment threatening to spill over. Here was this child, unencumbered by the anxiety and self-doubt that had begun to consume her. The purity in the girl's intention echoed Mira's wisdom about vulnerability, about courage. Hidden truths suddenly felt dislodged, floating to the surface of Eve's mind. "Thank you," Eve managed, her voice thick with gratitude. "This is perfect. Will you keep it on your painting table?" the girl asked, her eyes wide with expectation. Eve nodded, an idea igniting within her. "Yes, I'll keep it right where I can see it every day." As the girl waved goodbye and turned to scamper away, Eve felt an urgent need to capture the essence of that moment on canvas, a shimmering testament not just to her artistry but to the joy that genuinely comes from being seen and embracing the simplicity of expression. The rock now felt emblematic of her resolve, a reminder that art need not be cloaked in complexity but instead could thrive on clarity and authenticity. With renewed vigor, Eve returned to her canvas, each brush stroke now imbued with newfound clarity. Her recent fears of inadequacy began to dissipate, she could embrace her vulnerability and transform it into something evocative. This shift in perspective sparked a creative fire, compelling her to strip away the layers of self-doubt that had buried her authenticity. But as she poured her heart onto the canvas, a gnawing question lingered in her mind: could she really share this new path openly? Would her art resonate beyond the walls of her studio, connecting with an audience willing to embrace the same vulnerability? In that moment, Eve resolved to make bold choices in her upcoming meetings. Each artist would receive a piece of her truth, perhaps even the story of the little girl and her stone. This personal journey awaited its unveiling, an authentic offering that showcased her evolution and dedication as an artist. Yet as she continued to paint, a flicker of uncertainty remained. What if her authenticity was rejected? What if her fears materialized? That old friend of doubt crept back, whispering insidiously. Feeling the tension mount, Eve hesitated, her brush poised over the canvas. The weight of her fears clashed against her desire to create meaningfully. Just then, her phone buzzed, an unexpected notification. Glancing down, her pulse quickened. It was a message from Mira, hinting at a new project that called for trust and authenticity. The implications of this could change everything. Eve's heart raced. Would this opportunity demand her to reveal her most vulnerable self, risking exposure in ways she hadn't envisioned? Taking a deep breath, she opened the message fully. The design of her future, tightly wound between courage and fear, awaited her decision. How would she respond? Would she embrace or retreat? The moment hung thick in the air as she read on, a crossroads spiraling before her like uncharted territory, each option laden with potential and uncertainty. Eve Johnson stood at the precipice of change, a space brimming with uncertainty and potential. The cacophony of emotions swirled within her, intensified by the message awaiting her response. With each heartbeat, she sensed the profound truth that had unfolded through her artistic journey. Days had turned into weeks since she first dipped her brush into the rain of colors, a vivid rebellion against the stifling grip of self-doubt. Now, that chaotic stream of creativity had woven itself into a tapestry of resilience, urging her to embrace the vulnerability she had previously feared. As she carefully navigated her canvas, the lessons she had learned shed light on her next steps. No longer were her past struggles markers of failure, they were stepping stones guiding her toward authentic expression. Everything she had created, every emotion she had channeled onto the canvas was a testament to the strength rallied from within. Taking a deep breath, Eve opened Myra's message, reading it carefully. It was an invitation to participate in a local art showcase, a gathering of individuals who celebrated creativity, vulnerability, and denounced the myth of perfection. This was the moment she had waited for, but a pang of fear still clutched at her heart. She could visualize the space, a warm gallery filled with people searching for connection, seeking stories that resonated with their own hearts. What if they didn't see what she saw? What if the vulnerability she had cultivated laid bare before them elicited judgment rather than acceptance? The anxiety wrestled with her burgeoning self-assurance. Yet in the quiet of her studio, a small voice emerged, soothing and persistent. It echoed the innocence of that little girl and her painted rock, a joyous reminder to create for the sake of joy, to surrender to the process rather than the perceived outcome. Taking a moment to reflect, she gathered her thoughts, piecing together the narrative of her transformation into one cohesive experience. She could already see how sharing her artwork would forge connections in that gallery. What if her truths resonated long after the showcase ended? What if her own struggles mirrored the struggles of others who wandered in? The potential for shared understanding bubbling beneath the surface excited her, grounding her in a purpose that transcended fear. Determined, Eve replied to Myra's email, her fingers gliding across the keyboard. Yes, she would join the showcase. Yes, she would share her journey openly. Each keystroke felt more assertive than the last, weaving together the narrative of her evolution. She was ready to point her brush toward the horizon and embrace the future waiting for her on the other side. As she hit send, a rush of exhilaration flooded her. Regardless of the outcome, Eve realized she had already accomplished something immense, stepping outside her comfort zone and claiming a space in the world where her voice could be heard. Rid of weighty doubts, Eve returned to her canvas, lips curving into a smile. She painted with abandon, the colors screaming her truth, a vivid representation of the years weighed down by silence. The once murky edges of uncertainty transformed into radiant bursts of color, a clear articulation of joy wrestling with vulnerability. In the weeks leading to the showcase, Eve found herself surrounded by parallel stories connecting her deeper with her art community. They shared laughs, fears, and triumphs, bridging gaps that once felt insurmountable. Each conversation served as a reflection, a mirror illuminating her growth, Eve the artist, Eve the mother, and Eve the healer of her past. The day of the showcase arrived, sunlight pouring through the gallery windows, filling the space with warm golden hues. Eve stood at the center, heart pounding against her chest. Terrified yet exhilarated, she took a deep breath and wrapped her fingers around her unyielding paintbrush. Surrounded by strangers holding their own narratives, Eve set forth with confidence, including that little girl's painted rock on her table, an emblem of connection, creativity, and fearlessness. As visitors approached her work, Eve embraced the exchange, sharing her journey, her struggles, and her triumphs with others. Each voice that resonated with her story, every genuine look of understanding, solidified her position as a powerful artist in her own right. The display was no longer about seeking validation, it was a celebration of individuality and shared human experience. Genuine conversations blossomed, adding layers to her exhibition as friends gathered around, igniting the spirit of camaraderie. With certainty and resilience, Eve had conquered her fears. Her art was no longer merely a reflection of inner chaos, it had evolved into a vessel of truth, a journey shared and understood. Eve stepped back from the gallery that night, a sense of triumph washing over her. Not only had she found her voice, but she had also built bridges to others seeking their paths amid the messy, chaotic adventure of life. In that singular moment, Eve Johnson recognized the greatest gift of all wasn't just in the art she shared, but in living her truth unabashedly and connecting with those who needed to hear that they weren't alone. With solid confidence and a recognized competence, she had achieved a newfound clarity and purpose. Now, as the lights of the gallery dimmed and the echoes of support lingered, Eve felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment, an invitation to embrace her future with open arms. She was ready for what lay ahead, whatever that may be. And as she celebrated this personal achievement, Eve knew deep within that the journey was just beginning. This was the moment to show her growth, and now the world was ready to witness it. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and theories about this remarkable ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion, because you need to support the art of personal overcoming stories, and it starts by acting now.